Time you want, James. Hi, this is Chuck Evans. We'll get started in about 3 or 4 minutes. Where are you, in Virginia?
Yep, we're in Arlington, Virginia, right outside Washington, D.C.
Yep. Paul, it's 12:01. I think we probably should get started.
I think we should too. Let's get this kicked off, Chuck.
All right. My name's Chuck Evans with Windsor Advantage. Just want to welcome everyone today to our 30 at noon webinar series. Our guest today is Paul Santamaro. His friends call him Santo from Fran Data, and is going to share a little bit about franchise lending in 2021. But before we do, just get the commercial out of the way. We at Windsor try to provide these best practices webinars to you every month, not to replace the good trainings that NAGL, NADCO, and the district offices offer, but to provide best practices in certain things that they may not provide to you. So this month it's franchises. Next month, we're going to have Tom Meyer from Centrust Bank in Illinois. He's a successful business development SBA manager, and will be sharing best practices on how he set up his program. We're going to probably be doing that every month with a number of guests who have been successful in this industry, and will share some of their experiences and setbacks so you can learn. So Paul, welcome. And Fran Data is a great organization. They support the franchise industry. We at Windsor have a great relationship with them. So everyone here today will get a copy of this PowerPoint. There's about 45 slides, so we may take this to close to 1 o'clock, but if not, you'll all get a copy of this slide. So Paul, welcome. Thank you, sir. You're
welcome. Thank you, Chuck. Appreciate you having me on today, and everyone else for joining and taking a little time with us to talk about the franchise industry. Again, my name is Paul Santamaro. I'm Director of Lending and Risk Products here at Fran Data. And for those who aren't that familiar with Fran Data, we're the leading information and research provider for the franchise industry. So that means we help lenders underwrite brands and find new business development opportunities. We help franchisors in the same way reach franchisees and also do different types of research, competitive benchmarking, and we also help the supplier side of things. But enough about Fran Data. Let's talk about why we're here today. A little bit of a rundown today. We're going to start with the current marketplace and talk about what Fran Data is seeing in the industry. So there's going to be a lot packed in here about the current environment, effects from COVID, different changes in brands, what we've been seeing from lenders, what brands are requesting information, and what lenders are looking at what certain brand concepts. Then we're going to go and look at how we actually evaluate franchise performance. What are some of the tips and tricks that you guys can apply to your day-to-day examination of franchise brands? We're actually going to take a look at a franchise disclosure document. We're going to go through some information. We're going to get our hands dirty a little bit. Then we have a special section where we're going to take some time, and I'd like to report to you guys about situation that I'm seeing here at Data in my desk, and an increase in franchise submissions to Loan Guarantee Processing Center. And then we'll have some time for questions and wrap up. So we got a little bit of everything for everyone today. If you're a biz dev person, we'll have something for you. If you're an underwriter, we'll have something for you. And if you're in the special assets group, we will have something for you as well. So let's just talk about what we're seeing right now in the franchise space, in the marketplace, in terms of effects from last year. What are the important issues that are on the minds of franchisors? The big theme of the changes that you're seeing the results of are that what 2020 was about revolution and not evolution. Some of the things that you're going to see, we'll talk about things like pickup and delivery, things like mobile ordering, things like virtual sessions for things like doctor visits, and those were changes that we knew were coming to these different spaces, but we thought they were going to come on a longer time scale, about 5 to 10 years. These changes were forced and compressed into the last 6 to 12 months. And what we're really seeing, and the effects of what we're seeing, are how these franchise brands have dealt with these changes, and some of them have benefited, and some of them maybe had a reduction in either output or total units, and we'll take a look at that. So again, some of these issues are big changes on delivery and a focus and a shift to delivery, but what are the critical issues that affect franchisors? In fact, it's the royalty amount and the percentage of the ticket price and the check that some of these delivery services are taking from these franchise units. So services like Uber Eats and DoorDash typically are charging a 20%, 25% percentage of the ticket price. So the question for these franchisees and franchisors has been, what percentage of your borrower do they pay their royalties on? In a case like this, if they have a ticket for $10 and DoorDash took $3, do they pay royalties to the franchisor on the 10, or do they pay royalties on the 7? These are the types of questions that franchisors and franchisees are trying to answer that are going to affect your borrowers and the different analyses and cash flows that they're going to be presenting to you in terms of P&L and their profitability. Now, some of the brands are already getting on top of this. So brands like Tropical Smoothie and some of these other larger concepts are doing things like negotiating national partner rates. So they're going to DoorDash or going to Uber Eats, and they're putting contracts in place so that all the franchisees in their system enjoy special rates on the delivery charges. And of course, there are some brands out there that are already set up for this type of a change. So of course, the pizza restaurants that we know of, the Domino's and the Pizza Huts and those types of folks already have delivery as part of their model. So they were in a greatly advantageous situation when these events of last year overtook us. One of the things to pay attention to in the franchise world in relation to this change are changes in brand offerings. What these what the shift in the market has caused these franchise brands to have to do are to reevaluate their business model. So in the first thing we're seeing from franchisors is a change in their build outs and their footprints. They're going to lower footprint models, kiosk models, drive-through only, expanded takeout bays, delivery as a major portion of their total revenue. So we're definitely going to have already seen a shift, and you're going to start to see that. And what that's going to mean in practice is that, projects that maybe were 500K or 600K are going to start to come down in terms of what franchisors are going to project for a certain build out. You're going to start to see a 500K project is going to come in maybe around 300K, 350K, as brands reduce their footprints and try to get different costs of the process in hand and in line with the type of model that they're trying to put out going forward.
Hey, Paul, this is Chuck. Just a quick question on those. So if we're looking at projects of less than 250, there's a real need in this marketplace for lenders that have balance sheets that are interested in this level of lending. Is that correct?
Yes, there's a huge need on the franchisor side. So I can tell you that there is a giant pocket of underserved franchisees that are in the 250K and under space, especially so in the 150K and under. This is not one that I was going to put on this slide. I don't have in the presentation. There's a brand out there called Made Pro. And Made Pro has under 130 or 120K initial investment size. So they don't typically get looked at by the larger franchise lending shops in SBA that typically tend to favor a deal that's 350K and under. The sweet spot's around 500K. So they don't get a lot of attention. But what's interesting that's happening in that system is that's a system that's growing. They're about 250 units. And if we just look at the initial investment size of 110, 120K, it might not look attractive to some SBA groups or business development folks. But in reality, there's a lot of transfer activity that's happening in the system. And that's kind of the third bullet point here, where existing operators are gobbling up territories and single unit and 2-unit operators. So the more successful operators are buying up units and territories, or maybe selling a 2-unit location to a large multi-unit operator. And those deals are typically trading at multiples of revenue and are much larger, and they have stronger borrowers and a much larger loan amount, and that is attractive for folks that are in most typical SBA shops. So that's a good example of a dynamic where take a second look at some of these brands that are in that under that 250K size, especially if you have small loan programs out there. They are definitely looking for partners. So that's a big point in terms of opportunity and what we're seeing in the marketplace. So yeah, opportunities are there, but what are the challenges in evaluating these franchise brands? We're going to look at some disclosure documents, but it's going forward, ask these questions. What percentage of this franchise brand are on the legacy model, right, before 2020 versus the new model, versus the slick, low footprint, drive-through and delivery only type of brand? And how is the leadership managing that? Are we going to have two different systems, essentially? We're going to have a legacy system and we're going to have a new model system, and that's going to exist within one brand, and we're going to have our focus split, and maybe there's some stress points there? Or is there a plan to update those legacy units? And then we're talking again about refreshes and remodels, which is another opportunity for folks to get involved with lending to a specific concept. So understanding and managing that, asking those kind of critical questions of the borrower and of leadership is part of the way of how we kind of sift through the noise and understand what's really happening in performance with these brands. We're going to go through this in a lot more detail, but I'm just noting it here. We are seeing an uptick in franchise deals that are being presented to SBA for guarantee purchase. So what does this mean? This means primarily for loans that were put on the books prior to October of 2017. So what happened? Why is that date important? October 2017 was the month and the year when the SBA created the current SBA franchise directory. That's the website that we know now, where we go online and we look to see if the brand is listed with the negotiated addendum, remember Form 2462, or do we use, negotiated addendum, or do we use the standard addendum, which is Form 2462? You can use either of the two. So before that process in October 2017, all of the agreements were listed on the franchise registry. And we're going to talk about what the issues are and what SBA is specifically looking for based on some of the requests that I've assisted lenders with so far. But the point to make here is if you do have a loan that's a franchise that you made before October 2017, reach out to Franchise Registry and Fran Data as part of the process to SBA, just to make sure that you have all the agreements and documentation that you need. And the final thing that we're seeing in the marketplace is a ton of movement in the SBA world, right? So as I was chatting with Chuck before the call, we were just talking about how there are a lot of new SBA shops that have been created. Folks have moved around. Smaller banks have poached some folks from maybe larger banks and institutions to kind of create new SBA shops. And some of them are still kind of figuring out where and how to play and how to deploy some of this new personnel that they hired. It's a great opportunity for some of these institutions because they have a brand new opportunity within a bank. And a lot of these institutions do not have any portfolio, existing franchise portfolio. So we don't have preconceived notions about, we like food or we don't like home health care or anything like that. So there's a tremendous amount of green space and opportunity within the institution. But that also means that those actors within it need to drive buy-in among leadership. So we don't have a comfort level with any specific industry in franchising. And that's a lot of the challenges that we're seeing and helping lenders deal with that are starting up new SBA groups. So if you're in that boat, also think about Fran Data and some of the ways that we can assist you in that way. Quick note on Fdd Documents and Disclosures in 2021, just to the point of what's the availability of information, right? What can we expect franchisors to tell us about how they did last year? It's a little bit tricky in the disclosure documents because there's certain rules that are set up about how much a franchisor can actually disclose about how they did. They can put a lot of transparency in, but they can't really connect the dots, right? They can put a lot of information out, but we can't connect the dots and draw you a picture. The franchisee has to do that themselves. Most of the time, what we're seeing is franchisors including comparison data and throwing as much information as possible on a unit level, on a month-to-month level. And that was the most common approach we've seen. We've seen about 600 or so brands already submit their 2021 FDDs. And we are going to take a look at a brand called Relax the Back, which I just thought had fantastic disclosure. There's no other reason than I just think they were really, really transparent. I didn't get a chance to look at the performance specifically, but in terms of transparency, it's a great example that I want to show you guys a little bit later in the call. Now, on the biz dev side, just a little bit of information about what we're seeing on business development. These are brands that have recently completed their bank credit report. And what a bank credit report is an independent risk analysis of franchise performance. It's paid for by the franchisor. It's made available free of charge on Franchise Registry. Now, it's a contrast to our fund report, which some of you may have encountered in the marketplace. And the fund report functions a lot like a FICO score for a franchise brand. So Fund report is a scored report paid for by lenders using information that we get from public space and the franchisor if they want to participate, but we don't need their buy-in. Bank credit report is done with buy-in from the franchisor. They're paying for the report, so it's available free of charge to lenders. It is an independent report, so the lender does not, the franchisor does not have any input into the content of the report, but they can issue comments to add context to the report in a specific finding. But that's kind of the disclaimer about BCR. But all these brands are new to bank credit report. They've created a new report on the site. They're looking for financing, and that contact information is available for you to reach out and actually talk about lending to these concepts. So if you're in that stage of the game and you're a biz dev person and you're looking for new opportunities, those are 4 great brands to take a look at, to download those bank credit reports and maybe reach out about conversations to lend directly to those concepts.
And Paul, these are emerging, or are these
these are mature. These are mature concepts. So these are folks that
fund reports on all these.
Yes, sir. Yeah. So and that's a good point to make now about the difference. What Chuck's referring to is the maturity level of the brand. We use a distinction. Either a brand is emerging or a brand is mature. And what that is just simply size and time in the market. So a mature franchise brand has at least 5 years of disclosures, so public disclosures on a yearly basis. So 5 years of FDDs and at least 50 franchise units in the United States. For us, that's a mature brand. That means we can do a fund report on them, which is that scored report. And they typically might have a bank credit report or something else like that. Now, emerging brands are, of course, below 5 years, 50 units. Now, that's not to say that we don't examine emerging brands. We do great work on them, but we don't do a scored methodology to an emerging brand. And simply the reason is that we need to see a certain level of seasoning in the units before we can apply a scored methodology. One of the brands we're going to look at a little bit later is a brand called Crumble Cookies, which is an emerging concept that's growing very quickly. And some of you on the call may have already encountered them. One of the reasons why to do this is when we look at emerging brands, and no matter their growth level in the beginning, we tend to see that if they're going to have growing pains, if they're going to have digestion problems with units, it typically happens in about year 3 or year 4. So that's why we hold off till year 5 for that fund report, for that mature status. But all these brands do have a bank credit report and a fund report. So if you're not a subscriber to FranData fund reports, you will be able to get the bank credit reports. But again, just remember, there's a smaller universe of brands that will have a BCR. I don't know the exact number. I think it's maybe 150 or 200 or so brands, might be a little bit less, but about 10% of the total universe is going to have a BCR. So think about the brands, and we like to say there's a natural selection process with that report. So think about the brands that are already performing well. Maybe they weren't performing as well, but they've improved it and they want to show you why. Or it's a brand that has done a lot of lending and needs to satisfy yearly portfolio management reviews and credit reviews inside a bank. And that's another motivation for a brand to go ahead and do a BCR. Now, further to that, this here is a list of just brands that have reached out to us for financing. Apart from doing a bank credit report, most of the franchise brands that we have on our franchise registry are paying us a small fee to maintain their page, to put contact information out there for lenders, host their franchise disclosure document. We also share their fund report with them and do a couple other things for that spend. But one of the things that we also get is a fantastic flow of information from the franchisors in terms of their operations and where they're trying to grow and the types of deals they're doing and if they need financing.
So these brands are on here, are concepts that have reached out to us recently. Some of them do have bank credit reports as well. So the Joint Chiropractic, Urban Air Trampoline Park, those are brands that have BCRs that were created earlier in the year. But there are some emerging concepts, to your point, Chuck, on here. On the right side, a brand called Buzzable Creamery is something that we're going to talk about. They are a nitrogen ice cream concept, and we're going to talk about how they actually had a benefit from the COVID pandemic. So as you can see, there's a variety of different concepts that have reached out, and you'll find different levels of maturity from emerging to mature in these guys. Now, on the flip side of things, we know what franchisors are looking for financing, but what are lenders asking for, right? Who's my friend over in the next town at this bank? What types of deals are they doing? And then by extension, what are kind of the sectors and industries that are kind of hot right now and are benefiting? In the food space, we're actually seeing an increase in food. We're seeing food start to come back, and some of these different brands are actually actively recruiting, and lenders are trying to figure out, how and why and where they're going to actually deal with these concepts. Aroma Joe's is a coffee concept, and I'm seeing a lot of the lower footprint idea being expressed in that space in terms of things like coffee kiosks and drive-through models and that kind of thing. The breakfast space actually seems to be doing really well. And you see Eggs Up Grill and Duck Donuts are on this list. Great Harvest Bakery is similar to that in that way. So there are specific pockets of this food space that are starting to recover, and we're starting to see some strength there. There are also some as well that actually never really felt much pain, and we'll take a look at some of those changes and the differences between what we saw in QSR in food and sit down, where a lot of the pain in food was in sit down restaurants versus QSR and more of those restaurants that can benefit from to go and delivery. Fitness was an interesting one because that's starting to come back, and that was one that surprised me because last year fitness got lumped in with lodging and restaurants and everything else in terms of a high risk kind of a business. I understand there's a lot of exertion, sweating, and different things that go on in these places. But, I think from what we've seen in different places that there may not have been as elevated as a risk as we've seen in fitness. And I think some of the folks that are patrons of those types of businesses are a little bit more willing to kind of go out there and might feel that they're a little more healthy and take some risks. So we've been seeing brands now, specialty fitness brands, and some of them you may have run into. D1 Sport is an interesting one because that's an athletic training franchise. HotWorks, Yoga 6, Stride, those are specialty fitness concepts, very similar to ones that you may have had. But sports training is one that's interesting and is one that is coming up. D1 Sport is one. There's another one out there called D-Bat, which focuses on baseball. So that's something that we're seeing as well. And home services is one that really, really exploded. So USA Insulation, Men in Kilts is actually a handyman franchise. Window World, Precision Door Service, similar things. So, home services, anything that's kind of in and around the home, cleaning businesses, we're seeing a lot of increase in. And, so those are some of the concepts and sectors that we're seeing lenders request information on and try to go out and do business with. Now, I wanted to take a little bit of a look at what to watch for this year. I'm not going to read through all these different slides. One of the things that Chuck and James are going to send out after the call is Frdata's Ifa Economic Outlook for 2021, which is a much longer document. It's about 40-something pages, where we looked at different sectors of the economy, how franchising was affected, how the overall economy was affected, what were the differences. So if you're out there preparing any kind of a report for your institution or you want more information behind these numbers, that will be available to you. But the gist of things is that franchise brands have recovered and expanded faster in past recessions. Franchising has shown an ability to rebound faster than the rest of the economy when we have had these issues in the past. The main study case was in the last recession in 2008. But there are other examples of this. So much like the broader economy, the franchise industry did experience a contraction last year, on average about 2.6%. And then we mean that on a per unit basis. So the total number of franchise units is what we're examining here. And this is going to be reflected in the 2021 fund scores. As I said before, we have about 621 FDDs in here now. At the end of this month, we're going to have the first 260
2021 fund scores. So we're going to start to see the performance and how it was affected. There's going to be some changes. I mean, there's going to be some pain. We don't have a once in 100-year black swan event without having some pain. But what's fabulous about franchising is that in response to the crisis, the franchising has always shown an ability to make adjustments, share best practices, kind of come together and find the new way forward. And that's what we expect to see in franchising. We expect the total number of franchise establishments to actually experience a full recovery by the end of 2021, and then expanding out into over 780,000 units worldwide. So as a whole, there are going to be some pockets of franchising that are going to be lagging behind. There are going to be some pockets that are already jumping ahead, and we're going to look at some of the numbers. A couple of things I pulled out from the charts. So you're going to see major pain in lodging and the restaurant space. But as we mentioned before, the commercial and residential services, those home services, 8.8% growth in the middle of the pandemic. So there were some businesses that actually did quite well. Retail businesses, business services, again, had some significant growth. So in 2021, all the 8 lines of businesses that were studied for IFA are expected to sustain growth. It's really a question of what most people ask is, are we getting back to our previous pandemic levels? Like, where were we in 2019 and where are we now? And what did we lose? And kind of how much more ground do we have to give up? And that's what's in the next couple of slides here, looking at the total number of units, looking at employment, and looking at kind of total production, total output as a proxy for how these different industries are doing. So again, a lot of information here. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going through each one, but just to point out some of the things that were in the slides. If you look here, 2020 establishments. So again, total number of units, commercial and residential services, an 8.8% increase. We look to lodging, of course, as one of the places that had some major pain. We had an 8.7% reduction. But what's really interesting, again, is like I mentioned before, to take a look at the difference between quick service restaurants and table and full service restaurants. All right, so in QSR, we had a 6.7% contraction in units, but in table and full service, we had almost a 15% reduction, contraction in unit count. So much more pain in those kind of full service restaurants. And when I always think of this, honestly, my brain keeps going back to this. I live in Arlington, Virginia, and there's a couple blocks down over here, there's a restaurant called the Melting Pot, which is a fondue place, right? And this pandemic, I'm racking my brain to think how you do fondue to go. And I don't know how you do it. I still don't know. And for me, that's one of the brands that probably had some issues. So when you're talking about where do we go forward from here, you talk about what your approach wants to be. If we want to say, hey, we'd like to be in the food space, but we want to make sure we're making good choices, and we want to be more on the conservative side of food, where we want to look is in the quick service restaurant space. If we're saying we like to be in food and we want to be a part of a turnaround story, we know there's a ton of pain out there. We want to get in with a brand that's really going to explode. That to get back to their previous 2019 levels on a 15% increase, they're going to have really sustained growth over the next couple of years. And that's a strategy that maybe some folks are looking at too. So really interesting how you can see the difference between kind of where the pain was felt within food. And that's something to think about as you're kind of looking at brands into the future and thinking about, where you want to take your lending program. The next slide here just looks at employment. And this is one that's really, really interesting too. When we look at the difference between QSR and full service restaurants, pretty much a similar story that we're seeing, where we lost about the same percentage of employees in those units as we did here. But if we go back, look at the difference here. Look at the difference in lodging. Okay, so this is units. Lodging only lost 8.7% of the units, okay? But they lost 32.6% of the employment. So what does that tell me? They downsized, right? They got leaner. They laid people off. And especially in lodging, a lot of those people aren't coming back to work, okay? Whereas a hotel may have had like a full-out breakfast program and, hot breakfast. Now they've switched to continental. They found different ways, and maybe they've discovered or they've made the business decision that people don't really care about that stuff. We're going to go forward. We're going to do things a different way. So that might be a hidden potential
play in franchising to get with some solid hotel operators. You know, the industry as a whole looks bad, but if there are some folks out there that you can find that have good fundamentals, you may be in a situation where you can get in with a lodging provider that actually got a lot more efficient. Maybe the worst of their units closed. So there's a lot to kind of draw out from this information and kind of inferences that we can make. The final slide on here just looks at total output. So, you know, what did we produce year over year in terms of that's kind of a proxy of like how the businesses are actually doing, right? So one looked at total units, one looked at total employment, and this one looked at total output. The pain levels are very similar, but again, you can see in terms of output, if we look at the difference between QSR and full service restaurants, QSR only about a 10% increase or decrease in output, and we expect them to rise by 10%. So it's not a zero sum, but it's pretty darn close back to where they got to in 2019. Whereas in full table and full service restaurants, we went down 35%. All right. And so we know about the stock market and different things. It goes down 35%. It's got to go up more than 35% to get back to it. So even in a 30% year over year increase for table and full service restaurants, we still have quite a ways to go in terms of getting back to our full revenue levels in this year. And I think that's borne out so far in what we've seen in the first quarter and the second half of the second quarter, what I've heard and seen from different brands in different industries. So hopefully there's some good information here that you guys can kind of latch onto. Again, like we said, we're going to send you the full report that we did for IFA after the call. It's much longer and you guys can dig into it in a little bit more detail. And if you guys have questions on that are a little bit more lengthy, of course, we're available kind of offline to reach out to about that. So with this, I wanted to talk about that brand that did benefit from 2020 and just get you thinking about what the kind of a brand would benefit from a disaster like that, right? Like what kind of franchise brand actually comes out of this thing better and cleaner than they did before? And what was really interesting was a brand that I just came across recently. They joined Franchise Registry. It's a concept called Buzzable Creamery. And this is an emerging brand, Chuck. So this isn't a brand it has a lot of units and is kind of out there in the name you're going to know. But what does Buzzable Creamery do? They do nitrogen ice cream. So they have the liquid mix and they shoot liquid nitrogen into it and it freezes the ice cream. So you're making ice cream in front of the customer. There's all these different flavors and infusions you can get to. And if you guys have been to conferences, I remember a guy did this a couple of years ago at a franchisor conference, but you kind of have seen this kind of thing. But what's interesting about this is that the business is built from the ground up to actually infuse alcohol and require a liquor license. And it's not something that you normally see or that I've seen in an ice cream place, right? So it brings a really kind of interesting dynamic to the package in that it requires a liquor license, right? So there's an asset there in terms of the liquor license. But what it allows them to do is reach customers that they haven't been able to and kind of offer a different segment to parents. So parents can come in and get, kind of a boozy ice cream and kids can do something else. What's the game changer though? Why is this important? Why are we talking about this with related to COVID? The game changer was that during COVID, there were laws that were changed. So in all the states that this concept has units and where they're projecting growth, the package laws and the alcohol laws were changed to allow to-go service, to allow delivery of alcohol products, and even to allow drive-through, believe it or not, of alcohol-based products, booze, and a product like this. So this is a concept that built up their entire business model, opened some units, are doing pretty well, based on the point that we can never do pickup, we can never do delivery. This is our business. They come in, they eat our product, they go home. Now they can do to-go, they can do delivery. They're looking at drive-through options. They've totally changed the potential marketability and the way they can do business because of this pandemic. And most the CEO guy I talked to a couple of weeks ago was telling me that those laws have been grandfathered in. So this stuff's here to stay. It's not something that's going to expire in like a year or two. This stuff has been grandfathered in going forward. So that this has totally changed their per unit earning potential and totally shifted the way that they're able to do business and kind of look at the market. So those are the types of things you want to look for and kind of tune in and pay attention to when you're thinking about how a brand may have been affected by the pandemic and what steps have they changed and are they taking going forward to kind of be the best they can be. All right, any questions or anything so far? Anybody with hands raised or?
anything that we want
We
to talk
had
about?
one question. I think we answered it. BCR is available on the SBA franchise directory, or is it somewhere else?
It is not on SBA franchise directory. It's on the franchise registry site, which is by Frdata. We're going to take a look, and I'll just do a quick flip here. So this is what our homepage looks like. It's www.franchiseregistry.com. And that's the one distinction that sometimes trips people up. We're separate from the SBA. We work very closely with them. We love the folks over there, and we can assist as well with different questions on eligibility, and something might be tripping you up. Again, that's the point about the LGPC, Loan Guarantee Processing Center support. But yes, it's a separate site. Now, the BCRs are free. You do need to sign a non-disclosure agreement because the information in there needs to be kept within the institution. We can bring it to credit committee meetings. We can pass it around internally, but the BCR's got to stay out of the hands of prospective borrowers and franchisees. Those are the only rules around the BCR.
Got it. Thank you.
All right. So we're talking about some biz dev stuff. We're talking a little bit about underwriting. I want to actually dive into a franchise disclosure document now and just go over a quick kind of a checklist of what should we be looking for. A borrower hands me an FDD. What can you give me? What are 3, 4, 5 different things that I can just spot check and start to get a picture of how a franchise is performing? Now, when we look at a fund report and we do a fund report for a brand, we're looking at this concept. We're looking at 4 or 5 of its peers. We're bringing in, so we're doing this on many, many documents and putting a lot of time into a single fund report. But if we're just at the outset, we just want to take a look. Here are a couple things that we look at, and we're going to kind of go through these, and then we're going to flip over to an FDD and actually examine them and take a look at what we can see. So item 3 and item 4, if we look at a disclosure document, a franchise disclosure document here, for those that aren't familiar, they're issued on a yearly basis, right? So a franchisor issues this on a yearly basis in any year that they're going to be offering franchises. So for this brand, they issued their FDD March 30th, 2021. We expect that to be active for 1 year until March 30th of 2022. There is a table of contents page that highlights what's in this document, and every single FDD has the same items, the same table of contents. This is a rule. This is the Ftc Franchise Rule. So our federal government maintains this for us. So we know where to get this information on any franchise brand. There's 23 specific items. We're going to focus on just a couple of them here today. So items 3 and item 4 are litigations and bankruptcies. Are we being sued, or are we suing other folks? Item 19, that's our performance representations for the unit level. Okay. And so we want to ask, how transparent are we being on the franchisor level? Do they give us information, or do they just give us top line unaudited financials? Or do they give us full P&Ls for franchise units? That's where Relax the Back really shines, especially from 2020. Item 20 looks at the current unit situation, open and closed units, with a focus on terminations and ceased operations other. And those are statuses by which a franchise unit can leave the system. And item 21 is the franchisor financials. So in item 19, we were looking at unit level financials. How does a P&L of a franchisee look on the ground? 21 is going to look at franchisor financials, right? So there we want to look at where's the money coming from and where's it going to on the franchisor level. Basic expense stuff that we can look at looking at the disclosure document. So let's take a look back at the FDD for Relax the Back. Now, item 3 and 4. Those are litigations and bankruptcies. So now this is fantastic. There's no litigations here. There's no bankruptcies. What does that mean? If the franchisor, Relax the Back, is suing any franchisees, or if the franchisees are suing the franchisor, then that is mandated to be listed in litigation. I think there's a threshold of like 3 or 4 years or something like that. It has to be listed in this FDD for a period of time. Anytime franchisor is suing someone, or they're being sued by the franchisees. That's a great place to look to see if there's kind of the litigious nature of the franchisor, or their issues, or is there friction in the system. Item 4, bankruptcies, and this is not bankruptcy of the franchisor. This is bankruptcies of any of the officers of the leadership of the franchise. So when we scroll up here, you'll see there's an item 2 that has the business experience of everyone who's running the show at this brand. If any of these folks have any financial problems, of any kind of bankruptcies or anything like that, it's required to be listed in item 4. So those are just 2 really quick things that we can just kind of rule out, make sure we don't have any red flags or anything that might be going on with the franchise brand. Now, item 19, let's go back again. So performance representations, right? So what are we looking for here? We're not just looking for the quality of the information. We're looking for transparency. Now, this is a great example of one of transparency, and that's why I picked them. But what you want to pay attention to are brands that don't disclose anything. So item 19 is just boop, we're not giving any information, nothing there. And in our methodology, they get a 0 in pretty much every category we analyze them in. Or are they giving, part of the story, but not the whole picture, right? And that can come in a couple forms. They could just give us, they're reporting on the whole system, 150 units, but they're only giving us unaudited top line financials, no cost of goods sold, nothing else. Or they're giving us a robust P&L, but they're only giving it to us for, 20 units and there's 100 units in the system. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about transparency. From there, once we solve transparency, then it's up to you as an underwriter, or what we'll do in the fund report, to actually analyze the performance and see, is this good or bad performance? They're disclosing information, but how does this stack up against other brands in franchising? What's really fantastic about Relax the Back, as you can see, is they just went all out and they gave you gross sales by month for each store that they have. So this is something I've not seen before, where each unit in the system is numbered, each location is broken out by month. And you can see for some of these units where they close, this unit went to 0 in May, and we were at 60K February, 10K March, 2K April, 0 May, and then we're back at it in June. So this starts to help us answer these questions that we need to develop as underwriters, or that we need to answer to our credit folks on top of us, to say, how did they perform last year? When did they come out of it? How did they change to come out of it? And what is 2021 going to look like? A brand that discloses this kind of information is really doing themselves a big service and making your job as lenders a lot easier. So this is something I just wanted to point out. I'm not going to go into this and look at what's good or what's bad, or actually analyze any numbers there in item 19. But this is the kind of thing you want to see. You want to see as much transparency as possible. And so now we're getting into the annual average costs section. So this concept does a really good job of giving you both the revenue picture and the expense picture on the unit level. And that's something that folks are really going to be paying attention to as they look at brands this year. With item 20, that's just simply looking at the status of the system in terms of units that opened, that came into the system, units that left the system, and why did they leave? Now, this is important for us in our fund report when we look at historical unit success rate. We want to look at the relative success of the brands, but we're just not looking for a percentage number. We want to see what happened with these concepts. If they closed, did that closure result in a negative impact for a lender or not? That's what we look at when we look at historical unit success rate, and we look at an 8-year period when we're looking at this. You can do a 3-year backward looking in a single FDD. So if you pull your borrower's 2021 FDD, they want to open a unit, they give you the disclosure document, you're going to get 3 years of this information. What we typically do in our fund report is we're going to go back and we're going to grab the 2018 FDD, we're going to grab the 15, and we're going to go back. So we're going to get an 8-year picture here. So we're going to look back to like 2011, 2012 in terms of performance. What you want to pay attention to are these statuses here. And the statuses by which a unit will leave, a franchisee will leave the system. There's 4 different ways a franchisee can leave, right? So we're opening units. Here's what we have at the end of the year. 4 ways we can leave. We can do a termination. We can do a non-renewal, we can be reacquired by the brand, or we can be ceased operations other. Now, 2 of these are good, 2 of these are bad for a lender, from a lender perspective, okay? The ones that typically do not have a negative impact for a lender are the non-renewal and the reacquired. What does this mean? Non-renewal means we had a 10-year term or a 20-year term on a franchise. My SBA loan was 20 years. I went 20 years with the brand. I paid it off. At the end of my franchise agreement, I decided I don't want to renew with you, and we go our separate ways. Everyone's happy. So non-renewals, when we see a non-renewal, we don't calculate that against the franchisor when we look at historical unit success rate. Same thing with reacquired. Now, what reacquired is the franchisor comes in and repurchases the unit from a typically underperforming franchisee. There are other situations where they might repurchase a unit, but typically they're underperforming. And what they'll do in those cases is either perhaps pay off the loan, so your note, they may assume the note, and a lot of these franchise agreements have different step-in rights and different kind of comfort clauses that a franchisor might step in. So in that case, the loan is going to continue to be paid and assumed by the franchisor. Again, not a negative impact for a lender. The two columns that you do want to pay attention to, though, of course, are terminations and ceased operations other. Termination just says, hey, you're an underperforming franchisee. The franchisor terminates you and you're gone. Ceased operations other just says, hey, I'm throwing the keys at you. I'm done. I can't do this anymore. See ya. So that's what you want to pay attention to, and especially when you're looking at emerging concepts. Okay, anything that's 50 units and under, 30 units and under, we should not be seeing terminations or ceased operations other, especially in the first couple of years of business. That's even more so true for the company-owned units. But you just don't want to see units closing in the first year or two in an emerging concept. Sorry about that, folks. Okay.
Questions, Paul?
Yeah, go ahead. What do we got?
Are ZORs required to disclose outside lawsuits from, say, suppliers or name procedure infringement?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. How about, do you see the possibility for the item 19 to be standardized?
Yes, I'd like to see everybody disclose first before we change like what was being disclosed. We have seen in our collection that the disclosure rate, so like of the universe of franchises, how many are giving us robust item 19s has gone from like, I think it was 45% when we looked at it for the IFA in 2015 or 2016 to like over 70% now. So more than 2 or 3/4 of the franchise universe is disclosing. So if you're a brand that's not disclosing, you're in the minority already. Now to that point though, remember there's a limit to how much information can actually be disclosed, and that's the function of the bank credit report, because the franchisor wants to be transparent and put as much information out there, but they can't make performance guarantees. So like I said, they can put a lot of dots on the page, but they can't connect them for you. So there would be limitations into the kind of thing that they can do, but we just like to see more of them disclosed, and it's important. And really, the more banks that are asking for it and demanding it, we'll see that number continue to go up in terms of transparency and what we see.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, one more thing to pay attention to, and this is especially for the emerging brands. I'm going to give you another example of it, and when we look at this other concept called Crumble cookies. But projected franchised outlets. This is important for a couple of things. It's typically right after the item 20 information. So you have current outlets where we are, then you have the company-owned outlets, and then we have the projections. So this is useful for a couple of things. It's going to project. So if you're a biz dev person and you're looking at this brand to expand, it's going to help you size the opportunity. Number one. So are we growing? Yes. Where are we growing? Tells us by state. And does that match up with my footprint and where my bank is? Doesn't do me any good to talk to Relax the Back if I'm in Virginia and they're not opening any units, right? But this can also help us to understand if we're an emerging brand, if we're new, are we growing too quickly? How many people are we signing up for new franchises, and are we opening them at a rate that we should? That's a big question that we need to answer. And I don't want to inadvertently jump ahead of my slides because I'm going to go back and see where we are, but that's something that we're going to look at when we look at a concept called Crumble cookies, which we're going to go into right now. I wanted to spotlight this because this is a good example of an emerging brand that is brand new, that is exploding. Now, we're seeing, I am seeing some similar warning signs in this concept to a concept called Burger M, which was a concept that blew up very quickly. There was some pain in the SBA space, and some folks are still dealing with the fallout from it. I want to say this from the start. This concept is not Burger M. It is not exactly the same. There are some differences, but I think it's important to note these and have everyone kind of tune into them and understand what we're seeing, so you're able to see some of the same things. What is Crumble Cookies? Crumble Cookies is an emerging brand. It's a cookie franchise. So they do cookie baking, and they do ice cream. So it's basically cookies and ice cream in gourmet boxes. It's kind of really done quite nicely and quite slickly. But it's they focus on delivery in the late night business. So you can see right there, the first sentence says you will operate a cookie baking and delivery. So one of the things that's interesting here is this concept actually focuses on delivery of the product. One of the things that's alarming about the concept that bears paying attention to is that their growth is being driven by social media. They have a fantastic social media and marketing team. They have over 650,000 followers on Instagram, and by comparison, Zaxby's, which is a really established performing concept, only has 120,000. Wendy's has 1 million. What's unique about them, and I noted it there before, is that they leverage delivery on platforms like Uber Eats and DoorDash, and they do a huge late night business. So in the late part of the day, so 10 p.m. and after, they do a ton of business. Now, what are we seeing that's alarming? One, explosive growth and projections for growth that are far outside the norm that we would expect to see from an emerging concept. What we can see in this FDD, and this is the example I wanted to show you guys in contrast to the other one. Let's look at projected openings for Crumble cookies. Now, this brand was just created. So if you look at the total number of outlets, let's look at the unit counts, okay? They started in 2018. This is total units, okay? So in 2018, they had 0. They put on 15 in 2018. Then they added 39 in 2019. Then they added 84 in the middle of the pandemic in 2020, okay, on this thing. So explosive growth. Now, I don't see anything. There's no units closed, but we'll get back to that. Okay. Here's where there's the concern. Okay. Look at all these units that are opened and sold, but the outlets are not yet open. So let's go back to the top. What are these two columns? Okay. Projected new franchised outlets in the next fiscal year. So this means in 2021, here's what we're projecting to open in 2021. And here's franchise agreements that are signed, but the outlets are not yet open. So they're going to open 204 units this year, and they have 108 units that are signed, but the outlets are not yet open. So first of all, if you're on this call, you're going to hear about Crumble cookies, okay, because they want to open 200 units this year. Now, that in and of itself might not be alarming, but this is what starts to happen if a brand gets too far out in front of its skis, right? Gets so much interest, and this is what we saw with Burger M, where the concept started to blow up. There was a huge following on social media, and people that liked the burgers and went on social media and they're like, oh man, I can do this. Like, all I have to do is get $30,000 together, $40,000, and I can open my own franchise. And it started to snowball and get out of control. Now, again,
they had a history of that before, didn't they, Paul?
Yes.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes. Now, they had done that. The ownership group of Burger M had done that in another country.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to uncover some of that stuff.
Yeah,
but what I'm saying is the growth can be dangerous if it's fueled by social media and the operator's not experienced. This is not to say don't do Crumble cookies. This is to say if you're going to do Crumble cookies, you got to be super solid with the operator. That there are going to be some folks that think they can do this and they can't. Now, again, it's different than Burger M. Burger M was a concept that was a make your own sliders concept. Okay. So they had 8 different burger patties and, all these different things you had to do. And it was just a nightmare for anyone. So if you weren't an experienced food service operator, you were going to have a real uphill battle with Burger M. This is a little bit different. This is cookie baking. It's baked from scratch. It's different than the full food service operation. One of the other things that was an alert here was they have an inexperienced management team. So virtually no franchising experience outside of Crumble cookies. Now, if we go and look at, this is a part of the FDD that we touched on. This was item 2, which was the franchisor experience, the business experience. If you go through this business experience, and I'm not down talking this group and like who they are and whatever, I'm just looking at it from a perspective of franchise experience. If we look at this provenance here, these folks do not have experience in the franchise industry. They have experience in other retail operations and marketing and advertising, which are great skills to have in franchising, but they do not have that franchise pedigree, that experience of building a brand to give me the type of confidence to say, hey, we can go to 200 units and put the systems in place that we need to manage a system of that size. That means training, that means the royalty collection, that means legal and marketing and all the different things that need to be put in place. So again, something to pay attention to and tune into when you're making these types of analysis. Think a little bit deeper and understand this brand thinks they're going to go to 200 units. How are they going to get there? And do they actually have a plan to do that? Some of the other stuff that I noted here were the high build out costs. They are actually bringing some of this down to adjust this. So this is going to be probably you're going to see some different numbers coming in. But a lot of this was in leasehold improvement and equipment, furnitures, and fixtures. So when we look at the total improvement of the space, the total number of investment on this concept is $213K to $441K with the initial franchise fee, with $75K in leasehold improvement and $75K in equipment, furniture, and fixtures at the initial franchise fee. You basically have $175K worth of value going out the door the second you turn the key. Not a problem for an experienced operator, but again, you know, folks that aren't sophisticated with this kind of stuff, that eat a cookie and then get on social media, can very quickly find themselves relieved of a $25,000 initial franchise fee. And we just want to make sure that when they come to you guys as lenders to get a loan, that these types of things are taken into account and balance with a concept that's going to have a ton of excitement and a lot of growth that's coming up with it. Now, what are the major differences between Crumble cookies and what's the upside case? So you're going to say, hey, Santo, you're full of garbage. Why is this is actually going to work? Why? Well, Crumble cookies is actually reporting royalty revenue that is growing year over year in step with their unit sales. And this is the point that I wanted to come back to and make on franchisor financials and kind of close the loop for what we didn't talk about. We never looked at what to look for in a franchisor financial statement. Right now, most of the time, these are going to be at the end of the FDD. So Exhibit A, Exhibit B, something like that. We want to get down to the statement of operations. You're going to be able to go through the balance sheet and cash flows and all that. We want to go through the statement of operations. It's going to give us the last 3 years, and we're going to ask this very simple question here. Like we said before, where's the money coming from, and where's it going out to? One of the things that we saw with issues with Burger Rim was that they were just collecting initial franchise fees. So see this line here. They were collecting initial franchise fees every single year and not opening the units, okay? So they were never opening the units, and they weren't collecting the royalties. How do I know that Crumble Cookies is different? Because in step with their increase in initial franchise fees, the royalty collection is going through the roof. So this tells me, wait a minute, this is not like Burger Rim, because they're actually collecting the royalties. And if this number maintains, okay, then that tells me that maybe this is a system that the units are opening, they're paying royalties back to the franchisor. Yes, the growth is explosive, but if they can maintain that level of royalty growth, that's a system that has a chance to catch on. I'd still be cautious as a lender to say, I don't want to be one of the ones to lend to a concept that makes the wrong choice. So if they're gonna sell 200 units, 20 of them are going to fail. It's just the way it's going to be. I don't want to be one of those 20. So that's, again, what to look at when you're looking at the financial statements. Where's the money coming in from? And the two basic sources are franchise fees and royalties, advertising and marketing fees, again, as well as one. And where's the money going out to? Where are they spending that money on? And in this case, this is actually a positive sign for Crumble Cookies, that they're not going to be like Burger M. They're actually, royalties are increasing sharply year over year. As long as we see that again, the 2021 number, that 7 million should go to like 10 or 14, then they're in good shape. So a little bit of a journey on Crumble Cookies. We talked about the product mix, and we just did the live look at the FDD. So a little bit of just kind of a journey on Crumble Cookies, what we've been seeing. It's one I think that at least somebody on this call has probably heard of, or they're at least going to get a note about. They're mostly in the western part of the US. If you go on their website, and that's another thing that's scary, you go on their website and look at franchising, half the country is blacked out. It's sold from like west of the Mississippi. You can't even buy a Crumble Cookies franchise, which is, something that's interesting in and of itself. All right. Whew, boy.
We got about 5 more slides and we're running out of time there.
I want to just get through this. Let's just do this quickly. We'll just make this note. The big note here is we're seeing an uptick in submissions to the Loan Guarantee Processing Center. Okay. Yep. We're going to see more of these where loans, brands that are running out of PPP loans that maybe couldn't make it through, they're going to have to submit. Why is the SBA holding up the franchise loan repurchases? Because they want to determine whether or not your bank followed the SBA SOP that was in place when the loan was made. Now, why is there confusion? Because the SBA does not have access to our franchise registry site. Okay, they have a limited understanding, and we love them, of what the process was prior to October 2017. Okay, so this is an example of what I've gotten from SBA, and I'm sorry that this went to the end because I really wanted everyone to just pay attention to this. This is what's causing confusion with folks. They reach out to SBA, they put in a submission, they get an email back that says, please provide a printout from Friend Data showing that the franchise is registered, the approved franchise agreement and its date, and that they need to validate which franchise documents were reviewed and approved by the franchise committee for your loan. Because at the time prior to October 2017, there was no standard addendum. There was no Form 2462. So what SBA is trying to do with all these loans that come in prior to 2017 is sift out and understand, okay, when was the loan made? What was the SBA at the time of the SBA SOP at the time the loan was made? What was required in terms of documentation? And does the lender have it? And they don't really have a lot of answers to these questions. I've been seeing this document being sent out to lenders. What this is a screenshot of our franchise registry from 2015. This page does not exist anymore. You can't find it. It looks different. There's zero chance that you're going to be able to give this back to them. So when they ask you for the Fran data printout and they attach this document, it's causing a lot of confusion. You have no chance to find this. It doesn't exist anymore. You have to reach out to me and I can give you a screenshot of the page to show you that it's eligible. Okay, we'll go on Franchise Registry, and the folks that actually have access to our site will recognize this. Okay, this is our, just get over to the Tropical Smoothie page. They're going to recognize this SBA tab, which has all of the previous decisions from SBA. What they're looking for is this. They're looking for the SBA tab. They're looking for that a certain year that you did was approved, and then we're going to get them a screenshot of this page. Really best to just reach out to my team. In this slide, in the next couple of slides here, are the particulars of why they were requesting certain things. So you can see here what the process was, and so essentially SBA is looking for one path, the franchise registry Fran data path. There were two other pathways that you could have used to prove eligibility. One was do your own review with PLP. The other was a direct submission through SBA. If it was a direct submission, you probably don't have a problem, but there were other ways to prove this eligibility. We've also helped folks find missing documents. If you're missing a certificate or you're missing a signed addendum that's required, we've been able to go out to the franchisor. So your franchisee signed a document. There's a copy that was kept of that on the computer, the email, whatever, of the franchisor side. And we've been able to get old documents and save some banks some money with that type of work. So what I really want to wrap up with is just when you have something that comes in, SBA, franchise, LGPC, prior to October 2017, shoot us an email, give us a call. We can jump on and help you out with it.
Great. Good news.
That's it.
That's it. We got it at 1 o'clock. That's perfect, Paul. We're going to have you back because this is something that's been well attended.
I'd be happy to.
There's one last question. Let's see what it comes. Oh,
yeah. What else you guys got?
Great presentation. It wasn't a question.
Cool.
So we are going to share this with everyone. We're going to have you back. And if there's any questions, reach out to me, Paul, whoever you want, and we'll make sure you get the answers. Okay. We hope to see you guys next month. We're going to have over the next couple months a series of successful managers that are going to share the good, the bad, the ugly of setting up SBA departments and how they've been successful. So stay tuned and we'll see you next month. Thanks all.